everybody. Welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Cutlick.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about a mutual favorite of ours, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. Everyone loves Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to. And I think it's important to talk about Spider-Man individually, especially because of how much we kind of ended up talking about like Homecoming in the last couple of podcasts and where that might be going.
Well, I think Spider-Man is just always on the forefront of many media fronts. He's always kind of been oddly groundbreaking in many ways. And I think that's why we always come back to him when we're talking about Marvel, especially since he's such a popular character. And he's kind of always represented like a new wave of media entertainment whenever he's come onto the scene.
Yeah, and I don't think you're wrong about that. And I think it's interesting, especially in an era where, you know, the Marvel films very much set Iron Man as sort of, you know, the brand. Like Iron Man was the character. Now, Iron Man's dead. Oh, sorry.
Spoilers. Iron Man's dead.
You're not listening to this if you haven't seen it, I'm sure. Iron Man's dead. They've made very deliberate nods to the fact that Spider-Man could become the next Iron Man. Like, almost like direct.
Well, yeah, we said before, they kind of positioned Iron Man as Peter Parker's dad, at least in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, and I think there's also, in one of the trailers, they literally say, like, I could be the next Iron Man.
Yeah, I think that's in the latest trailer, too.
But that might not be in the movie. That could have been just for the trailer. That sounds like something you might do just for the trailer. But what we kind of wanted to do was, instead of just talking about the movie, we want to kind of do sort of a brief overview of what made Spider-Man so special for so long. I would say we're not going to get hyper-specific on anything.
No, there's a lot of history on it. It's not like Captain Marvel where there's like big breaks in between.
Right.
Spider-Man's been pretty much consistently going since the 60s.
That's where we're going to start our story, kind of. You get to Marvel in 1962. They've launched the Fantastic Four at this point, which has been very successful. The Fantastic Four was in itself an attempt to modernize sort of a Justice League concept. Stan Lee thought the Justice League was super cool, and he wanted a way to make like a Marvel Justice League, and the way they did that was making sort of more flawed characters than the Justice League were. Because the Justice League at that point were very much like, you know, 6 of the exact same guy with different costumes and Wonder Woman.
Yeah, they're all blonde, too. That was the big thing. I remember, what was it, Hal Jordan was the first guy with brown hair, and that was groundbreaking.
You might be right on that from, like, the transit. Well, except for Batman and Superman. Batman and Superman always had dark hair. But a lot of the Golden Age heroes were blonde. That's funny. I never thought of that. I'll do a Green Lantern episode when something significant happens, right? So he really thought the concept was cool of having sort of these multiple personalities to play off of in a story, but he also didn't really think there were multiple personalities to play off of, that it was more just this straightforward thing. So he created Fantastic Four, which is essentially a family model that has all these problems. Because of the success, they wanted to do something kind of similar, but go back to a single hero. And this is where the story, depending on which version you want to go with, and we're going to kind of present 2, but there are way more than 2 versions of this with way more sort of intricacies and things. So the sort of undisputed part of the story, and I'm sure if someone listens to this might have a dispute, but widely accepted part of the story is that Martin Goodman, publisher at Marvel, was looking for sort of a youth character. Stan Lee had come up with sort of a vague idea of a teenage superhero who crawled walls. And even Stan Lee was really like non-committal in a lot of interviews to like exactly where that came from. Jack Kirby had worked on a character with Joe Simon for Archie that was tentatively going to be called Spider-Man or the Silver Spider, and it just kind of got dropped. It eventually turned into The Fly, who was a real Archie superhero. But Kirby had done some designs for a more spider-based character that were floating around. This is where it kind of breaks off. No one disputes that Kirby worked on Spider-Man really early on. One version is that Kirby did almost all the work, and by the time Spider-Man was on the page, it was pretty much just his art being interpreted by Steve Ditko because Stan Lee didn't like how Kirby was presenting the character. He felt like he presented him too, almost like Superman-ish, like too big, and Ditko had like a real good sense of sort of awkward. The other version, which I think is kind of more accepted these days, is that Kirby was out of the process really early. That he had added some design elements. From what I remember reading, mostly the sort of webbing, even under the arms, was more of a Kirby thing. And that the mask and the general sort of visage of Spider-Man was more Ditko, and he had worked on it and had gotten that character to that image, which I think is extremely important because to this day, there aren't too many characters that are that visually striking. Like, Spider-Man is like an insanely cool costume.
No, absolutely. It's also like, this is a common thing of Marvel at this point too. Like, there's a lot of disputes between like who created what, who wrote what. I think that has to do with a lot of the Marvel method.
Right.
Where, like, it was mostly up to the artist to design the characters and what the character actually does. And Stan Lee was just making broad outlines about what would happen issue to issue.
And then he would go back and then fill in the script.
Yeah, with dialogue.
With a text bubble, whatever needed to be filled in, Lee would come back in. And you're right, it does lead to a lot of dispute of who did what. We're going to get through a little bit of the history, and we'll get back to that, because I have a comment about that.
But to get back to your other point about, like, what the costume is, like, since the 60s, it's changed very, very little.
It's changed very little, and it's still unique. Spider-Man visually is something appealing. Spider-Man looked good on a t-shirt in the 70s when it wasn't cool to wear comic book t-shirts. That's important to like why this character becomes popular. And I'm sure it's important to the success of Amazing Fantasy 15, where he first appears, because that was sort of a test. Goodman wasn't super locked in on that concept. He wanted to give it sort of a test and threw it into Amazing Fantasy 15, which was a book that was ending. And when the character was successful, he decided to go forward with it. And a little less than a year later, we get Amazing Spider-Man #1. So Amazing Spider-Man 1 comes out, and now the character is finally in his own book. You have Steve Ditko on art. He will eventually get a plotting credit late in his run, but early on he doesn't. And this is a weird thing, and this is just instinct. You have all of these books that are supposedly being written by Stan Lee in this era. And we know how the Marvel method works. We know that he plots, someone else draws, and then he goes back and writes. Spider-Man from almost the first issue feels different than even most of the other Marvel books. It feels very controlled. And I can't help but wonder if part of the reason that Ditko doesn't get credit until later in the game is that maybe Lee really was controlling Spider-Man a little more. It's very word heavy compared to a lot of comics. It's very, at that point, like now it looked like nothing. I can't help but feel like there's too much continuity within the stories where whoever was writing the specifics had to be more involved than a lot of those books.
Well, even in those early issues, like, Spider-Man's a very kind of wimpy guy, and he's kind of arrogant, too. And there's a very strong sense of character, even just without the art. If you're just reading the script, I'm sure the original script doesn't exist, but if you just read the raw dialogue and, like, the raw description of each scene, you would get a very good sense of these characters. So I think there is a case to be said that, like, there was very strong writing at the beginning, especially with how Marvel was trying to develop something that would catch on, especially off the success of the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And it also is, as much as Ditko could potentially contribute within a story, maybe it really was, Ditko like taking half of this and pushing it in that direction. But it feels like a writer's book from the beginning, which is weird in 1963.
Well, he has like a lot of personality, a lot of background too. He's a reporter, he's also a scientist. There's a lot of like background going on in that. It's just not raw like page art.
And I think what really sets that completely apart for me is, I mentioned that there's a continuity to it. In the early Spider-Man issues, a good portion of the time, the first few pages of an issue are referring directly back to the last few pages of the last one. It immediately sets it apart from really anything DC was doing at the time. And even kind of sets it apart from a lot of the other Marvel books at the time. It just feels different. And I mean, it proved its successful formula. It proved to be popular, that people wanted storytelling like that.
Well, he wasn't fighting a whole lot in the beginning either. There's a lot of just like setting up like how Spider-Man gets his powers, who his relationships are with people. Like there's a whole him being in high school, and that's been such a big part of his character ever since his inception. Yeah,
and it heightens the action too, because it makes it feel, instead of it just being a bunch of punching, when something happens, it feels more important because it is. You've developed all these characters, and if something happens to those characters, it's a way bigger impact. Ditko leaves the book with issue 38. That's in 1966. So he has a pretty good run on it. Back then, it's fairly long. It's fairly long now, too, because we're kind of back to that.
But yeah, people are just jumping, especially for artists now.
John Romita would take over, and it's really Romita and Ditko, I think, that kind of form most people's vision of Spider-Man, even to this day, which is also impressive, and is also, I would say, complimentary is not even, like, the correct word.
Well, I would think for, like, the Spider-Man that exists in the early 60s, like, you see a lot of these characters get introduced, but I don't think they really solidified until, like, about the 80s, or even, like, the mid-70s, when a lot of these more complicated storylines started emerging.
I would agree with you to a certain extent. I think by the 70s, though, a lot of them have formed pretty well. 80s is where you get a lot of sort of weird payoffs. That's where they start going in different directions, which I think are equally as good. But I think the fact that if you look at an image from a John Romita Spider-Man comic and you see the characters, even the villains, it's a testament to sort of how strong those designs were between Ditko and Romita. Like, the Green Goblin basically looks the same as he did. You know, like, Sandman basically looks the same. There's almost no changes to design. It's interpretation, pretty much.
They either add more detail, like, if you look at the Green Goblin now, there's a lot of, like, scale mail on him, but even back then, like, it's just, like, the purple shirt.
Right.
And the Green Goblin look.
But they do imply it. It's an interesting... Mm-hmm. thing. It's, you know, and to be fair to the artists from that period, the printing wasn't as good either.
No.
So even like artists who could have done something that complex weren't bothering because it wouldn't show up on the page. It would end up muddy because it'd be too much line. It is interesting how much of Spider-Man is still that Spider-Man from 1962 through like the 70s.
And he's, like, immediately successful, too. Because he gets a cartoon in 1967, which is pretty groundbreaking for that time, I believe, right?
I would say so, yeah. And this is where, you know, we're not going to get hyper-specific. We could probably do a podcast just on animated Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah.
But for all intents and purposes, from 1967 through now, Spider-Man has been on television. Whether it be in reruns or not, but that character has had a presence in television, in primarily animation, for over 50 years. And, like, consistently. Just, like, always there. That says something about the popularity of the character. Like, you have proof. It's just proof.
Yeah, he's just somebody people want to see. Like, you can debate about the quality of these shows pretty often. The 60s Spider-Man stuff is pretty corny. And so is the 90s stuff in a certain way.
Both with great theme songs, though.
Yeah.
Just excellent theme songs all around.
But that's kind of what's striking to me about is, like, how immediately popular Spider-Man gets. Just, like, from the first issue. Because this is only, like, 4 years after his debut.
Right.
And he already has a TV show.
Yeah, and there's a couple of similar situations with, like, Spider-Man and Captain Marvel with, like, the serials early on. But that cartoon is still, like, referred to now, which, you know, those serials aren't.
Yeah.
So, Spider-Man's got this really good momentum and has sort of established this idea of not being able to miss an issue. We get to June of 1973 in Amazing Spider-Man number 121 and number 122, and we have the death of Gwen Stacy. Now, we talk about comics now, like, a death of a character doesn't seem all that important.
No, yeah, because they always come back.
But this was huge. This was Spider-Man's, like, this was Spider-Man's Lois Lane. And they kill her. And not only do they kill her, you're not entirely sure who's to blame.
Well, they kill her in a pretty gruesome manner, too.
Yeah.
But, like, because they present him as such, like, now an iconic choice, either to civilians or your, like, girlfriend.
Right.
And back then, like, that was something that'd be teased at. But this is where it actually happens.
And I think it's a reflection of the culture. You know, this is a culture that we've gotten through sort of the post-World War II, like, heroic ideal. You now have youth that has dealt with Vietnam. It's a very different culture from when comics started. And I think, you know, the death of Gwen Stacy reflects that. Not only reflects that, it reflects that comics very much became literature sort of around then.
Yeah.
It's that early 70s sort of Bronze Age thing where it's that second, third generation of writers who grew up on comics now. and they see the characters differently because in their heads things were much more elaborate, and now they're able to take that and sort of put it on the page.
But Captain America gets rid of the title Captain America not too long after this.
You have to put it in this sort of weird perspective. I think it's something that as you get older you realize that a decade isn't that much time for like art to change. Like it's sort of like about where it does. We'll actually get back to that a little bit too later on in this. Like the Bronze Age going into, sometimes they call it like the Dark Age in the 80s when you start getting things get like heavy. They're kind of the same thing.
But they deal with it in different ways. Like, the 80s stuff is a lot more directly graphic, and this is a lot more, like, motioning at shadows and things like that.
But I think that has a lot more to do with what publishers are willing to do.
Yeah.
In the 80s, they're willing to drop the comic code when they want to. In the 70s, they wanted that distribution, and...
They needed it, really.
They needed it. Which is another way that, Spider-Man got so popular is because, unlike today, you could get a Spider-Man comic when you went to the corner store. You get a Spider-Man comic in the market. You can get a newsstand, which barely exists these days.
Well, I also think he related a lot to, like, kids and teenagers because kids would see him as like, oh, I want to be like Spider-Man when I'm, like, 15 or whatever. Or when you're a 15-year-old, like, wow, Spider-Man's dealing with the same problems I have. Like, the bully at school is punching me around. I wish I could be like Spider-Man and just tie him up and hang him from the basketball hoops or whatever.
Which is interesting because Spider-Man, through the death of Gwen Stacy, kind of is that first motion towards aging.
Yeah.
Because that's, if you started reading this book in 1962 and you're still reading it in 1973, you're 10 years older. And now, as horrible as this sounds, like maybe one of your friends died. Maybe something terrible has happened in that time, and this would be something you could continue to relate to.
It's like dark, but it's not too dark. It doesn't get like how it gets like the idea of like Spider-Man and growing older becomes pretty heavy later on, where it becomes a very contentious issue because some people want Spider-Man always to be a teenager, and then other people always want him. They kind of say he has to grow up. He can't be in college forever. He can't be in high school forever.
Him being a kid really ends in the 80s. As ridiculous as this sounds, it sort of starts around the time of Secret Wars in 1984 when he gets the alien costume.
That's when they bring him to the larger Marvel universe. Like, he was always a part of it. He was always talking to people because everything's set in New York.
Right.
So he was always bumping into other characters.
As it should be.
But here was like he was actually like involved in the broader storyline. He was very self-contained before this. Like, Green Goblin wasn't harassing Captain America, really.
Right. It was always a very focused story, and this is where Spider-Man starts to become the brand.
Well, he was kind of like, I would say he was always the brand, because, like, he was always kind of pushing Marvel forward. Like, yeah, Hulk and Captain America were popular, but Spider-Man's been consistently popular at the same popularity.
Okay. I'll give you that one. And they used his image a lot on, if you look at older merchandise and things, like Spider-Man is sort of the central image, but that's also because of how great the design is, as we were saying. But we get this alien costume storyline, which is kind of goofy when you think too hard about it, because it's him having this symbiote. I'm going to say symbiote. There's a debate now, apparently. Costume that like starts to mess with his mood and all these things and makes him bad. And that storyline does not last nearly as long as most people think.
No, it lasts only like 2 years.
Yeah, barely 2 years. And then he rids himself of the costume, but he keeps wearing the black costume, but it's a fabric version of the black costume.
Right, because it's just a cool design too.
And that's what I wanted to get to is somehow Spider-Man has 2 of the best costumes ever designed for a superhero. And the black costume will not go away because everyone knows how cool it is. It's not like Superman having like this alternate costume. Like, it's not like New 52 Superman where everyone was like, all right, whatever, it's gone.
Yeah, it's just the blue underwear is... The blue underwear is not there. That's it.
Yeah, this is a costume that writers work into their storylines to this day because they know people want both of them. That's just really cool because it's something that pretty much can only happen in comics, where you have 2 designs for a character and they're both popular and you start to build story around the costume.
Well, even like in video games too, like the black suit Spider-Man costume's always like this secret unlockable. There's always like the
and it
DLC
wasn't,
thing.
And people were mad. It wasn't in the last Sony one because they're going to put it in the sequel and everyone knows it. But it is. It just shows the power of like good design for comics. Is like the black costume became like an icon because it only lasts like, let's see, it's 4 years consistently.
Yeah, then there's different ways he incorporates the costumes here. Like, but he's with the symbiote only for like 2 years.
Yeah, it's a very short story.
Because, like, in the story itself, Parker realizes how toxic it is to his personality. And then, to work back a little bit, we forgot to mention about Mary Jane getting introduced basically immediately after Gwen Stacy dies.
She had been mentioned prior.
Yeah, as a hot model, like Aunt May knew.
She is introduced, and I always thought that was interesting too, because that's another point of contention, is like, how important is Mary Jane?
And that's still the great debate, Gwen Stacy or Mary Jane, between Spider-Man fans.
And this is what I can say for myself, is from like my literary point of view, where I've like read all of this stuff, Gwen Stacy. But I grew up in the late 80s and 90s, and it's Mary Jane.
Yeah, that's for how it is for me. I just know Mary Jane. That's what I've been exposed to all this time.
And so she becomes a big part of this too, going into what I think, aside from Kraven's Last Hunt, and I think Kraven's Last Hunt is just this great story, and that's in 1987. I read a little bit about that. There are 2 volumes of a like reader's guide on the website to Spider-Man. I'm going to finish it, I swear. It's just way harder to write than you probably think it is, because you have to comb through everything and try to like condense it down. So you'll see like important stories for the beginning, important stories for like the 80s. And bar none, Kraven's Last Hunt is my favorite Spider-Man story. And he's in the black costume at that point. But that's the kind of stuff we're not talking about as much on this podcast, is like trying to get into specifics of the stories. We're trying to get into these like iconic things that change the character.
Yeah, and I think Mary Jane and even... Well, Kraven's Last Hunt is iconic in a different way.
Right. Once you're reading.
Yeah.
It's extremely important. But if you're trying to look at those like cultural points where Spider-Man just nailed it, it's a little different. It's Empire Strikes Back versus Star Wars. You know, Star Wars coming out is more important than The Empire Strikes Back. But it doesn't mean The Empire Strikes Back isn't a better movie, which it is. I think we all know that. That's not controversial. That's not controversial, right? I can just say that. You have to kind of be in it already for it to be as important. And that's 100% what Kraven's Last Hunt is. You have to understand Kraven. You have to understand Spider-Man. And then it's fantastic.
And that's kind of why I brought up Mary Jane, because Mary Jane throughout all of this is the one that's kind of keeping Spider-Man grounded. Gwen Stacy, for most of it, is kind of like a far-off figure who's kind of like somebody Peter Parker's pining for. He's not really involved all that much in his life. And Mary Jane changes that dynamic completely. She knows about Spider-Man. She's very active in his like superhero life.
Yeah, and I think that's an element of that's also this aging of Peter Parker. Like, that's a far more adult way to play it. Like, a kid would try to hide it from his girlfriend.
Yeah, because
like he wouldn't know what to do.
They give it good reasoning in the comic book, but it's also at the same time like, you should probably just tell him.
Yeah, that would be the more mature thing to do. But he's not mature, so it works. Now we're getting into him becoming more and more mature. And 1988, it's funny, you know, when I was younger, this was still like the hot new thing, but this is where like 30 years of perspective really helps. Venom is introduced.
One of the most iconic villains.
The costume had crawled off and ended up on Eddie Brock, and he comes back as Venom. Scares the shit out of Mary Jane.
Yeah, well, he's just a scary character to look at.
He is a scary character, and that's one of the things that I think maybe has been lost over the years with him, is we're so used to seeing Venom that you forget how creepy that is, that this is a giant costume with a smile.
Well, like the toothy smile and the long tongue with the green goo dripping out.
But initially, it's not so much focused on that. It's just this, like, giant version of Spider-Man with a really scary smile, which is, I think, as effective, especially in that. And that's where you lose the black costume for a while, because it's supposed to be Mary Jane doesn't want Spider-Man to wear it. Cause
she convinces him not to wear it.
Yeah. Don't worry, he wears it again. It's too cool not to wear it. It comes back.
Every writer tries to incorporate it.
And we get to Venom, and Venom's like a huge, huge landmark. Venom leads to Carnage 4 years later.
Well, there's a whole Venom symbiote line, too, and, like, even Venom now was kind of an anti-hero, which is kind of the path a lot of, like, sympathetic villains take.
Yeah.
Because Venom, well, he wasn't a pathetic character, but, like, the reasons he gets the symbiote is pathetic.
Yeah, and you can sympathize with Eddie Brock to a certain extent. Like, some of the things he does is pretty terrible, but but you get where he got pissed, you know.
You get where he's coming from,
right.
Which is, like, I think why Venom has stuck around much more than, like, Green Goblin, who's just kind of crazy dad or whatever interpretation going with.
And this really, like Venom is the appropriate introduction for Carnage in 92 because Carnage is the opposite. Carnage doesn't have that. Carnage is a serial killer who becomes Venom.
Who just gets it in his jail and then he breaks out.
The thing with Carnage, and this is an argument I'll make, you might disagree with this, is I think this is where people start to get uncomfortable. We've had this straight line story of Spider-Man from, Amazing Spider-Man 5th Fantasy to, the early 90s, early to mid 90s. And there's just like too much going on. And there's never been a contraction. There's never been, Marvel doesn't do like a crisis like DC does where they clean up continuity like every 7-10 years, whatever it is.
Well, it's 7-10 years now.
Yeah. Well, they're about to do it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just did reverse it though.
That's not official news, but that's what everyone's saying. Go check the rumor sites. You'll see it too. I think this is where people start to get a little disillusioned. It's just you get hit with Maximum Carnage, and it's really not that long of a turnaround to the Clone Saga where they go back to an old storyline where there's clones of Spider-Man, and now they're saying that Spider-Man wasn't Spider-Man, and it's this other guy, and by the end of it, you find out Spider-Man was Spider-Man anyway.
I think the Clone Saga is more of the fatigue, and with Carnage, I think Carnage is kind of like that natural extension of what worked in the 80s. We're just going to keep amping it up. Because that was the general trend of comics at that time.
Yeah, you make it extreme.
Yeah.
Now it's the 90s and it's extreme Venom.
Like Bane comes in and breaks Batman's back. And then you have Nightfall and everything. And then Gotham gets wiped out by an earthquake. And that's just the general escalation. And then it perfectly culminates in the Clone Saga, which is like a storyline that just spins its wheels for years. That's consistently delayed, and nothing really happens for issues and issues. And it's a complete back and forth, and then by the end of it, nothing's really revealed. The characters that are introduced just disappear. Some people remember Scarlet Spider, but his costume's just not as cool as Spider-Man. It's just Spider-Man with a t-shirt on top of it.
I'm sorry, I enjoy Spider-Man with a hoodie, as you can tell from the two action figures of the Scarlet Spider that I have.
And your Carnage action figure.
That's the Red Goblin. See, this is all getting...
That's the
Red
Goblin?
That's Red Goblin.
That's Red Goblin. That looks
We'll get into that. We're going to get into that. It just became so stretched at that point that people started to doubt it. So we're really getting into the late 90s now where and there's stuff we're not even talking about. They kill off Dr. Octopus, and then there's a female Dr. Octopus, and then...
Most of the stuff in the 90s gets forgotten about because, one thing to remember, I guess, about 90s Spider-Man is that it introduces a lot of, very cool artists.
Yes. You get McFarlane, you get Larson...
John Romita Jr., right?
Romita, yeah.
Yeah. The 90s Spider-Man was very much more art-driven, which is kind of the general trend of the 90s, too.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of, the iconic art now from the 90s is from the Spider-Man issues itself.
That late 80s, early 90s. And it's funny because you get McFarlane followed by Eric Larson, who then both are founders of Image.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the definitive art-driven comic of the 90s. Now they're a little different, but back then that's really what it was. It was art-driven comics.
Well, I wanted to bring up McFarlane for himself because McFarlane has that one iconic cover where it's Spider-Man with that really detailed suit.
Right.
And I think that kind of ties into how he's introduced in the beginning where it's just the webbing. And now we have Spider-Man with these really intricate details on him. And that cover sold it.
He also got that little boost because it was the return of the original costume. And it was it's an interesting era. But by the end of the 90s, it's just sort of fatigue.
There's a whole industry fatigue. The whole industry crash, which is a whole episode in itself.
That's a whole thing in itself. But especially Spider-Man, I think, was really affected by it. There really just wasn't much to hold on to coming into the late 90s. That starts to change as, it did both Marvel and DC around this time. But a huge one for Spider-Man was 2000, Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley's Ultimate Spider-Man. Because Ultimate Spider-Man, the Ultimate line was designed...
It was the reboot without actually rebooting.
It was the reboot without a reboot. It was trying to make everything accessible. Now, a year later, was it accessible? No.
Well, it got way more convoluted, way faster.
Yeah, because it almost became an alternate version of the regular Marvel Universe at one point. It doesn't mean... I'm not saying the stories were bad, because I read Ultimate Spider-Man for the entire original run. But... acting like it was a simpler version of Spider-Man probably isn't true, but what it did do is it gave a starting point when things had gotten so convoluted by the end of the 90s they had tried to go back and fill in like continuity things with Spider-Man. There's a Spider-Man Chapter 1 book that actually is really good. It's just, like I said, it's like trying to put Band-Aids and Band-Aids and Band-Aids over everything, and eventually you don't have anything.
Well, I remember Marvel also trying to launch like those big omnibuses books that were like on newspaper, and like they were black and white and everything.
Yeah, Essential. Marvel Essentials.
Marvel Essentials. Those were coming around this time, but like Ultimate was kind of the culmination of this, where it was just a flat, like, this is the starting point. These are characters you know, but we're putting a new twist on them.
And it also introduced the no web shooter Spider-Man, which would be important in a couple of years. Also, a year after Bendis and Bagley start Ultimate Spider-Man, you have J. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr. take over Amazing. And while Straczynski doesn't do much to reboot the brand, he does kind of go in and refocus. And he did a lot of controversial things in this run. He had clones of Gwen Stacy and Grey Goblins and all sorts of stuff happens. But at bare minimum, when Straczynski takes over, you have another straight line. And you have something you can start with him and kind of keep reading. And I think that helped, but they didn't really go with it ultimately.
No, we'll get to it in a little bit because there's a few other things we have to talk about first that help culminate in all this. And
that run lasts, I think, 6 years.
Yeah.
It's a really long run. 2002, though, is a very important year for Spider-Man.
It is the release of the first Raimi film, which was kind of mired in a couple production issues, but we won't get into that. But
that could be a podcast, too. Just getting a Spider-Man movie made could be an entire podcast because of the canon things. But eventually, a Spider-Man movie gets made by Sam Raimi.
And it's a great movie. Is it really... There's some criticism, but overall, it's just a great movie.
I think for its time, it's what it needed to be.
I think if you go back and watch it now, it's good. It's really good.
It's not trying to be Batman, which everything from 1989 on was trying to be, basically. Except for X-Men, which,
which is a
deserves some credit. Yeah, another one, too.
But Spider-Man went a very campy direction compared to, like, X-Men and even, like, the Batman, because Batman tried to be kind of weirdly grounded, but it still kind of, like, walked the toe with the camp because of Tim Burton stuff. But X-Men, on the other side, was very, like, military. This is how it would be realistically. And then you have Spider-Man, like, in a wrestling match, fighting the Bonesaw. And doing...
Bonesaw's ready.
And doing all kinds of other, like, kind of off-the-wall shit. And that's what made it really fun.
It was refreshing. Yeah, it didn't feel like anything else felt. The effects for the time were insane. Mm-hmm. The Spider Cam is now used for everything, and it was developed for the film.
Yeah, even... That shot hasn't aged well, but, like, at the time, that's such a cool, like, you're swooping down with him. Like, video games try to emulate that to this day. Even things like the web shooter scene, that's an iconic where he's trying to figure out how to shoot the webs. The upside down kiss, that's now a super iconic, like, kissing scene in the rain and everything. This movie, like, it has made so many, like, iconic shots that have just been dissolved into the general, like, media landscape.
And, that really continues into the second one 2 years later, which is a pretty quick turnaround. And I think that point, the movies, if not literally the most successful, but I think they were.
They were the second one was pretty successful. The first one was well known for being the biggest opening of all time at that point.
They certainly brought back superheroes to being cultural touchstones. Like, Spider-Man was like a thing that, like, you might see like a 13-year-old girl wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt again.
Yeah. To bring back how cultural it was, I remember watching Entourage, and the big first season arc was Vince's movie breaking Spider-Man's opening day record with Aquaman.
I still want the fake poster for James Cameron's Aquaman. They existed. And I remember seeing one on eBay. And I was like, oh man, I should buy this. And I didn't buy it, and I'm stupid, because that would be great to have right now. Yeah, and we really, like you said, we continue that into 2004's Spider-Man 2, which I actually think is a better movie. I think it's
less iconic, but, like, I think it's better written. The scene where Dr. Octopus kills all the doctors always creeps me out. Because I feel bad for everybody in that scene.
And it's Raimi tapping into his Evil Deadness a little bit.
Yeah,
that's very Evil Dead.
That scared me when I was 12. It was like, oh my god, all these people are dying. What's happening? It didn't have a beam in the sky like every other Marvel movie does. Right. This time it's just an orb in the ocean.
It's just an orb by the... I think it was on...
It was a sun. It was like a sun. It was like...
It's on the East River? Where
it's on the East River.
Yeah.
And it sinks into the Hudson River where it belongs.
Because... all superhero things should take place in New York. Fight me. So 2006 is a big moment in the comics. We have the comic version of Civil War, which, if you haven't read it, is pretty different from the movie. And within this, when Spider-Man aligns himself with Tony Stark, mind you, this is not Tony Stark plucking a teenager like who's fighting crime in New York City and having him join his team. This is like fully established Spider-Man deciding that Iron Man is right. Yeah. He reveals his identity because that's more of the focus in that story, is people having to reveal their identities to operate.
Yeah, they have to be government sanctioned, and part of that is revealing their public persona. And Spider-Man's big thing is he always kept his identity secret because then the villains would attack his loved ones.
Right.
Which is exactly what happens in Civil War. They immediately attack his loved ones.
So this creates a problem for the character, and for a couple of years we kind of sit on that. But we're going to talk about something before we even get to that. 2007's Spider-Man 3.
Infamously Spider-Man 3. Now,
I've read a lot on Spider-Man 3 because I just wanted to know. This was not the movie Sam Raimi wanted to make.
Obviously.
It's pretty well documented that he did not want anything to do with Venom. That's, I think, is just, his age when he was reading the comics. And Venom was not a character he was interested in. He was forced to put Venom into a movie that already had, three... Well, at the time, I think it had 3 villains.
Yeah.
And then they replaced... Vulture was supposed to be in it and was replaced by Venom because it was just too much. Raimi wasn't happy while he was making it because he was just getting a lot of studio pressure, which is understandable because he just handed them 2 of the biggest movies of all time and they wouldn't let him do what he wanted.
Which is really weird.
It's bizarre and something that probably wouldn't happen now.
It might.
Maybe
it happens with Star Wars all the time.
True. But, so it was just this sort of bizarre production, and they decided to add Gwen Stacy into it after. It's just a very strange movie. There is a relatively new cut of it. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen
it. Is on the new 4Ks and Blu-rays they did, and it is slightly better. But the movie is just so bizarre that it's hard to.
It's juggling a lot. You can tell they put a lot of work into Sandman. But
the Sandman stuff looks gorgeous.
Yeah, but it's like the Venom stuff is really gets off the rails.
Yeah, and Venom is that version of the Venom origin, which we don't end up getting in the Venom movie, is at least a movie on its own. Mm-hmm. If not something you should be building for a movie before, where you introduce the characters and then don't have anything happen and then have Venom be a payoff. It's just this bizarre, rushed movie that the other 2 weren't.
Yeah, because you're dealing with Sandman, who has his own complicated arc, Hobgoblin, which has his own complicated arc, and then you have Venom in there, too, thrown into the mix.
I don't even... Look, we've proven through other movies that, amount of villains doesn't matter, it's just how you balance it. This is just not balanced. And even though it does fairly well, if I remember correctly, it just is not really well liked.
It killed the momentum, because a lot of people walked out of the movie pretty pissed off.
Yeah.
And this is before, the internet could kind of, sync a film. This is kind of, right before the cups of, the worldwide internet, everybody being able to use it.
And you're right, yeah, because I do remember, being excited because of the leaked trailer.
Yeah. As
opposed to being horrified that this was too much. But...
this is before YouTube. This is before Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah. Even if it wasn't, it was before they mattered.
That's a good way of putting it, too.
So, we have this sort of disappointment with Spider-Man 3, and I can't help but feel like this weighed on decisions at Marvel. Marvel now has a Spider-Man whose identity's been revealed. He's a full-on adult. He's married.
He has a stable job.
He has a stable job. He doesn't have kids, because that was a whole thing, too.
That's in the story.
He had a kid almost... See, these are things that you can just read. We're not going to get into that. But in 2008, they do... a story, One More Day, which leads into a story called Brand New Day, where I'm not even going to get into the complications of this, but they reboot Spider-Man. Yeah. He's not married. They don't make him younger.
They put him... This kind of gets into the issue of, where do people see Spider-Man? Because for a lot of people see him, as just a high school student. Right. And... up to this point, he basically graduated college. He was making his own family. He had a fairly stable career. He wasn't working at the Daily Bugle. All these kind of iconic ideas that the Raimi films had established are core to the Spider-Man character. These weren't in the comics anymore, and this is kind of a tension where Marvel Comics are trying to match the movies.
Right.
Because this was before, like, Disney bought out Marvel and all the Marvel rights. So there wasn't really, like, that same consistency we have now. Here, this is them trying to, like... Then there's even, like, Eternal issues, too. Eternal Emotions. Like, I remember the editor-in-chief really liked Spider-Man being in high school. Like, being a younger Spider-Man. He was very against him having a kid. Yeah. And there's all these kind of internal things going on. And Brand New Day reset Spider-Man to basically being back in college.
He's kind of and sort of a loser again.
He doesn't have a stable career anymore. He's basically in debt again.
Which is interesting because we're going to get into this too. This gets kind of interesting. So we kind of reset him, and there's a lot of cool stories around that era, or called New Ways to Die, that introduced new versions of characters, and the retcon was sort of partial. Like, people didn't know who Spider-Man was, he wasn't married, but a lot of things also did happen, so they didn't completely get rid of the past. It's very New 52. Very New 52, yeah.
And then at the same time, you have Ultimate Spider-Man going along, which is creating its own complicated continuity, where, like, some villains actually have technology over the super geniuses, and, like, Bendis is basically just running that now.
Yeah, that starts to get as complicated as anything else. We start running with this Brand New Day continuity in the main line of comics. Dan Slott sort of becomes the head of this as we're going. And this is, now that we're getting into sort of the modern era, Slott kind of rebuilt Spider-Man back into having a big cast and having an adult Parker after a while. Like, it doesn't take long for him to really get back to that, which is kind of funny considering how much they were fighting it. As this is happening, Ultimate Comics does something kind of crazy. They kill Peter Parker. And in 2011, they introduce a new Spider-Man, Miles Morales.
I remember getting into... This happened right before the New 52. And I remember going to the comic store and all the issues being sold out. And I think they had one issue left in the black slipcase and everything, and I didn't buy it. I should have.
You should have now, yeah.
But, like, I didn't even know what that was. But I did hear about Peter Parker dying and then, like, Miles becoming the new Spider-Man.
And it's a cool story. It's a risky story. The only thing that I think... Now it doesn't matter. We have, like, an established Miles, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But at the time, it felt like such a stunt because everyone, I think at that point, people knew the New 52 was coming, and it just seemed like Marvel's counterpunch.
Yeah, it definitely felt like that at the time because people were like, well, Miles is not going to stick because we didn't even know what his powers were. We didn't even really have a background. He just shows up at the end of the issue.
And it was very, it's where that cynicism kicks in. Like that, if you've been reading comics a long time, a lot of these things just end up stunts.
Yeah, especially in the Ultimate Universe, too, because a lot of, X-Men were dying left and right at this time. Like, half of the Fantastic Four was dead. Reed Richards was crazy at this point. Like, the Ultimate Universe got crazy, and, people were dying all the time, and nobody thought this would stick.
Right. Sorry, man.
Yeah, I didn't intend that.
So, we introduced Miles, but The Amazing Spider-Man back in normal continuity is in pretty good hands. We end up with the Superior Spider-Man storyline, which some people don't like.
It was enjoyable at the time.
I enjoy it, and I think it's cool, and we all knew that Peter would be back. It wasn't, but you get into, a pretty good groove with Spider-Man. Over at Sony, they weren't feeling doing a Spider-Man 4 because of Spider-Man 3. So in 2012... as the Marvel Studios brand is really rising, they do The Amazing Spider-Man. Mark Webb directed. I have arguments about this, but I like The Amazing Spider-Man. I think it's a cool way to portray it, and the one thing I really like is I like how harsh of a turn there is between Peter and Spider-Man. He's using it to get out aggression, which I think is kind of a more realistic teenage view, where he's angry. His uncle's dead. And now he has this power, and he can kind of throw it in the face of these bad guys. And I like that.
Yeah, I think it also, he goes a more science direction, too. There's a lot more about the science here. I don't really like the whole spy subplot, essentially, about Peter Parker's parents.
That's not unfounded either, which is one of the things we skipped. But... Amazing Spider-Man does okay. It doesn't do great, but they do go on to Amazing Spider-Man 2, and this is where some people really don't like it.
Yeah, also at this time, Webb is introducing Gwen Stacy to the general public, because in the Raimi films, it was Mary Jane until Spider-Man 3, and even Spider-Man 3, which was so reviled, Gwen Stacy was, pretty overlooked.
Right. So he has a pretty solid Gwen Stacy here.
Yeah,
I think they did a good job. I think if Webb did anything remarkably well compared to Raimi is I think he's better at realistic relationships. I always felt like the relationships in Amazing Spider-Man worked.
Yeah, the Gwen Stacy bounced a lot better with Peter Parker than Mary Jane ever did in the Raimi films.
And in Amazing Spider-Man 2, a lot of people go that it's really hokey. I don't know. I still really like that movie. And I love the costume because the costume looks like a 90s rendering of Spider-Man, which is kind of the tone of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. It feels almost like 90s-y. And that means a little bit ridiculous, which is what you get in Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, I just think it went a little too far in some directions. I don't know. I don't really agree with how hard it went on to trying to make it very scientific and everything.
I think that was just to try to give it a different angle than the other ones.
Yeah.
What I think we would both agree with is they somehow made Gwen Stacy's death more brutal than it is in the comics.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's just vicious and it's uncomfortable, which is what it should be.
Well, it's hard to shock people now, and I think that's what they were trying to go for, especially since they're supposed to be building, Sony was announcing, this is their sixth film, a Venom film, all this whole, universe, and at the same time, Disney was trying to, negotiate the rights away from them, and it became, a huge mess, and I think this is them trying to, put their stake in the ground, no, this is ours.
We talked about that a little bit, too, because there's a little controversy with that, with the Disney deal.
Well, we'll get into it in a second, because that's really nice.
But do you remember that if you Shazammed the end titles of Spider-Man, it gave you the teaser for Sinister Six that never happened?
No, I don't. What?
Yeah, it was just, images, going past the... It was stupid. It was just something I found. Because, there was, a thing on, a website. It was make sure you use your Shazam during the end credits. Ooh, why?
Oh, the app. I was thinking Captain Marvel for some reason.
Oh, no.
It's what?
Spider-Man right now, we're about to get into 2016, which, objectively isn't too long ago. Spider-Man's on a pretty good course as of right now.
Yeah.
Dan Slott did a lot of work to kind of move the story back to the center. They've even referred to the fact that there was the reboot and characters are aware that happened.
He cut a lot of fat while adding the fat back in.
Right. But I think positive, because I like adult Spider-Man. I think that journey is cool, and I like that we got that back through the Dan Slott run. Mm-hmm. And now Nick Spencer, I think, is doing phenomenal work on Amazing, kind of picking up from there. He did go back to making Spider-Man a lovable loser a little bit. Not as harshly as other ones have. But if there was anything that I was sort of all right, yeah, we've done this. His sort of pseudo-sequel to Kraven's Last Hunt that they just did was really cool. And I just don't want to tell people what happened in it. But it's really good. Read it. It's still it just ended, so I'm not going to give that away. 2014 is when Amazing Spider-Man 2 comes out. 2016 is when Civil War comes out and Spider-Man debuts in the MCU with a new actor. However, there is a lot of scuttlebutt that Sony was already negotiating to get Spider-Man into the MCU. If you go back to the Blu-ray for Amazing Spider-Man 1, they talk about how they almost put Stark Tower in the skyline and they couldn't clear it. Amazing Spider-Man 2 is pretty small as far as implications. It's all within New York. There's pretty big indicators that there was a version of Civil War that was going to have Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. They scrapped that script because they were told the deal wasn't going to go through. They wrote another version of the script that didn't have Spider-Man, and then they were told 11th hour that they were getting Spider-Man, so they reworked him in, but they were told it was a new Spider-Man, so that's where that whole thing came from. But there was some point where that Amazing Spider-Man was probably going to be the Spider-Man.
That's what I remember hearing too, because at this point, Sony had a whole cinematic Spider-Man universe planned.
Right.
Pretty, timelined out and everything too.
And they might still have something to that effect now that they've Venom did really well.
Yeah, I think most of it got scrapped already.
We'll see.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We never really know what these companies decide until they actually make it.
But now in the last 3 years, we've had 6 feature films with Spider-Man, including the animated Into the Spider-Verse.
Which is the first Spider-Man film to have an Oscar.
Yeah, and also made Miles Morales extremely important.
Yeah, and Spider-Gwen too.
Yeah, I think that Miles is
the main character.
He's the main character of the movie, and I think there's awareness for Spider-Gwen or Ghost Spider or whatever the hell we're calling her.
I thought it was still Spider-Gwen.
No, it's Ghost Spider now.
Oh.
They introduced the new name. I think we should just make her Spider-Woman at this point.
Well, there is a Spider-Woman, just no one cares about her.
There's a couple Spider-Women running it. There's
3.
a menagerie of Spider-Women. it really sort of changed Spider-Man because they showed that this alternate version of Spider-Man can also work, which I think opens up a lot of doors both for Marvel Studios and for Marvel Comics because, you know, you get jaded and you think maybe no one can die. But what if they were to kill off Peter Parker in one of the Marvel movies? What if they were to kill off Peter Parker in the comics and have it permanently Miles?
Well, they did in Ultimate Comics, and now they're kind of like merging together in a weird way.
Yeah, now Miles is in continuity. I've read kind of an explanation. I don't read the Miles book consistently. I've read some of them, but...
The explanation is it just happened.
Yeah, the explanation is there was that Secret Wars, right?
Yeah.
That other Secret Wars. Not the Secret Wars where he got a new costume from 1984, obviously. We're really at a point where Spider-Man's been reinvigorated. Where we're kind of at another one of these like Spider-Man Flash moments where Spider-Man is suddenly the most important character in the Marvel Universe again.
Yeah, he goes
and now
up
we
and
have
down.
2 of them.
He goes up and down like every 10 years or so, maybe even every 5 years, because Spider-Man is such like an iconic character. And now he's kind of spearheading the entire Marvel franchise.
Right, in the films as well, because if he's the successor to Iron Man and Cap is out of the picture, it's really him and Captain Marvel. And Black Panther.
And
it's debatable, but I
Falcon.
think... Here's the thing. I don't know how quickly the audience is going to take to that outside. I think they're going to look for the biggest character that they're already really familiar with. And I think that's Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, that's why I think that's why Far From Home is the first of like this post-Endgame movies, because he's going to be kind of the one spearheading all of this. He's kind of the one that's immediately familiar with the audience. And you also get a bit of the civilian angle too, where like you hear the kids talking about like, well, Iron Man's dead. Shit, what do we do?
Right.
The Avengers are gone. Shit, what do we do? And I think
Make
Spider-Man's
3 Avengers movies. Oh, sorry. I've been reading a lot of Reddit.
And this is kind of like a weird culmination of all these, where like Spider-Man's been in like 4 movies in the past 3 years, and it's just kind of like an insane like how popular it is, because like it didn't take much to get him back into the audience's favor.
No, and I think that shows you just first of all, the strength of the character. Though I would, we talked about this in the last one. I'm not super big on the Homecoming version of Spider-Man.
No, but when you think about it, all Spider-Man had to do was show up in Civil War and audience immediately liked
right.
it.
And they already probably had some background knowledge.
Yeah, because you had how many Spider-Man films in the last just like decade, and 5 of them are really iconic.
And cartoons and
cartoons,
and
yeah.
live action shows.
The 90s Spider-Man, 2 Spider-Man cartoons in the 2000s.
Yeah.
Another one.
MTV's Spider-Man. I liked MTV's Spider-Man. It wasn't that bad. MTV's Spider-Man, like, it's kind of like Ultimate Spider-Man the cartoon, which is pretty sweet. I think, like, the point ultimately is, since 1962, with very little interruption, Spider-Man has been at not only the forefront of Marvel, but of the entire genre.
Yeah, the whole superhero genre. Like, people who don't even read comics really love Spider-Man.
And it's going to be really interesting to see where they take this. People have seen Far From Home at this point, as we're recording this. You know, they put in a classic villain, perhaps not quite the villain he is in the comics from Mysterio. But that shows too, like, they want something for fans to hold on to. Like, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't put Mysterio in a movie if they didn't think that would get attention.
Yeah, no, Mysterio is kind of a cult villain. It's not like putting in Venom or Green Goblin. Like, Green Goblin hasn't been around since the Raimi films. And
well, he was almost around. He was around, yeah. In Amazing Spider-Man 2 for like 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody was around for that one.
Yeah.
But, like, Mysterio is kind of a real cult villain, and I think them putting in shows the confidence they have in Spider-Man.
There are rumors that we won't get into about perhaps more classic villains being involved in things after this. But there's Spider-Man. Popular then, popular now. Probably popular tomorrow.
Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe on our YouTube page, on the web page, and you can follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. What's that one?
Vero.
You
can also follow us on Vero.
For all 5 people.
And we're going to have some interesting stuff coming up. Maybe I'll get that next chapter of the Spider-Man reading guide up for you guys. It's hard, I swear.
It's a lot
I started
to work
it. We just talked about how convoluted the 90s are. That's the next thing I got to write. I tried one time. I was sat there for like an hour and I just couldn't figure it out. I'll do it. Don't worry. It'll happen.
Because you have, 10 Spider-Man comics going on at that time?
Yeah, we didn't even get to the fact that they, started doing more and more books. It gets complicated. Anyway, thanks for listening.